I wanted to start out by saying I like to dig into these cases, particularly cold cases and unsolved crimes, because I am optimistically convinced that many of them can be solved and will be solved in my lifetime. And the somewhat infuriating aspect of them is not that everyone is powerless to do anything to help, but that in most cases some people, or even a handful of people, know something that can lead to the apprehension or even conviction of anyone responsible. This particular case is tragic because the victim is so young and was dealing with family issues and inner torment when she went missing and was subsequently murdered. Sarah Rae Boehm was a 14-year-old girl from Western Pennsylvania. After recently wrecking her bicycle, she scraped her knees and she never had the chance to live long enough to see them heal. But what would happen next paled in comparison to a bike fall and an injury one could mask with a band-aid and some rest. Sarah lived with her mother, Phyllis Williams, and brother, Mason, in Rochester Township in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. It was the middle of her summer vacation at approximately 10:45 p.m. on Thursday, July 14, 1994, the last time that she left her home on Mellon Road. She told her brother she was going to sleep over at her friend Jennifer's house. She'd already had the okay from her mom after calling her 15 minutes before and asking if she could go. No one is completely certain of what happened next, and she never reached her friend's house. She was described by her family as being a sensitive and introverted girl, a quality many of us can relate to, and gentle and sweet. A teacher described her as, quote, the type of kid that could sit in a chair and disappear, end quote. She was a cheerleader, was noted as being a good student, and played in the school band. Sarah loved animals dearly, most likely feeling an ease with them that she struggled to feel with people. It's common for timorous children to connect with animals because pets feel contented with the mere presence of their owners. Phyllis was working the night Sarah disappeared and trusted her daughter to make the short 2-block journey to her friend's house unscathed. But when she failed to show up at home for a doctor's appointment the following day, Phyllis called Jenny and discovered that there were, in fact, no sleepover plans at all. Sarah had asked if she could come over, but Jenny wanted to spend some time alone with her family and declined her friend's request. Now, I may be looking too much into this, but I do find it slightly strange that a young teenage girl would rather hang out with her parents than spend time with a good friend. I'm a little curious if they had some kind of falling out or if Jenny was mad at Sarah or something else happened. But after Sarah's mother discovered this, she promptly made a formal missing persons report on Friday morning the next day with the police department. Having a family member or partner or friend die is truly awful, but having a loved one missing must be some of the worst pain one can ever experience. Closure is something we must ultimately find within ourselves when life deals us a hand we're not ready for. But how can anyone obtain closure when no one knows what happened or if the person missing is still alive? Her family searched places that the local kids Sarah's age would hang out. They scoped around bowling alleys, the river, any friends' houses, but nowhere yielded any clues that brought them closer to discovering what happened. Life grew more tumultuous for Sarah's loved ones as they heard nothing from her. A few days preceding her disappearance, a startling discovery shocked her family and led the case in a new direction altogether. Her family unearthed a letter in her bedroom where she spoke of running away and wanting a new life. She alleged being in the thralls of an abusive relationship with a man who was a bit older than her. The letter said, quote, met an older guy who gave me love and whatever else I am not getting at home. He was a very, very abusive man. Didn't anyone wonder why I always had injuries and I said I fell? I always said the day I walk out the door is the day I'll never return. I thought everything was over and it is best to leave. I'm just a burden. She also detailed running away to a big city like New York or Washington, D.C. Because of the vagueness in the letter, one cannot rule out the idea that maybe the man who was abusing her could have had something to do with the abductor. It wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility that an abusive partner would have a friend or associate who would kidnap his girlfriend, especially if he got wind that said girlfriend wanted out of the relationship or wanted to run away. Her uncle Kevin Boehm didn't believe the letter to be true and thought she was just upset over her parents getting divorced. He remembered her being sad. He thought the vituperative man she spoke of in the note was a fabrication and perhaps a way to deflect from what she was going through. Because of her parents' divorce, she undoubtedly began to feel the structure of her life at home was weakening, as her parents' marriage did. But regardless of whether or not the letter was fictional or not, It did lead some to believe that the mystery man in the letter could very well be real. And not only that, he could have been the person who abducted her that late Thursday night. Police considered that, because Sarah fabricated the story about seeing her friend, she had run away. Nearly a month later, in Portage County, Ohio, the nude body of Kathryn Menendez was discovered lying prone on an oil access road on August 25, 1994. The 17-year-old girl had been reported as a runaway just 5 days before. The soon-to-be West Branch High School senior met a violent end, being beaten, stabbed, assaulted, and strangled, and no articles of her clothing have ever been found in the 28-plus years since her untimely death. Authorities believe that Kathryn was killed elsewhere in Alliance, Ohio, and brought to the death site. It's speculated that she was murdered between 24 to 48 hours before she was discovered. In 2009, nearly 15 years after Kathryn's death, the FBI had billboards fabricated with the hope of solving her cold case murder, but still, police are no closer to finding the person or persons responsible. Ironically, on the day that Kathryn, or Kathy as her mother Janet Menendez called her, told her mother she was going over to a friend's house for a sleepover. It was August 20th, 1994 in Alliance, Ohio. The next day, Kathryn's father told Janet that their daughter had not come home. Although Kathryn wasn't always prompt about returning home, Janet had a sneaking suspicion that something was wrong, and that feeling turned out to be more than an unwarranted impression. Less than a week later, Kathy's mother took a friend with her to identify her daughter's body. Janet Menendez had postulated 3 main persons of interest in the slaying of her daughter, all of which have refused to take a polygraph test. One of these men had unrequited feelings for Kathryn and a history of a violent disposition. Many people had claimed to have sighted Sarah for many years, but those sightings would prove fruitless. Not even 2.5 months later, on November 4th, 1994, 2 hunters discovered highly decomposed skeletal remains only several hundred yards away from where Kathryn Menendez was discovered. The crime scene was remarkably similar in the deaths of both victims. The hunters reported the body to officials, and a composite sketch was eventually drawn. But before that, investigators noted that the body belonged to a young female, and the cause of death was noted as being, quote, violent homicide, unquote, by strangulation. She most likely had suffered a broken hyoid bone, the tiny U-shaped bone in the neck that supports the tongue. It wasn't until almost a decade later in 2003 that police identified the remains as belonging to Rae Boehm. Beaver County Detective Lieutenant Kim Clements pieced together that the body could have been Sarah's after it was discovered, but DNA finalized it. The lieutenant detective was searching the Jane Doe network when she discovered the sketch of the young girl that disappeared on July 14th, 1994 looked similar to Sarah's. Her family was able to get a small amount of closure by burying the relative, but there was still a giant hole in the mystery of what happened. Sarah's last known location in Pennsylvania was nearly 50 miles from Berlin Lake, Ohio, where both young girls were found. It is unknown whether Sarah's and Kathryn's cases are definitely related, but similarities were too great for authorities to ignore. 2 teenage girls said they were going to meet a friend for a sleepover and were found murdered in an almost identical fashion. Sarah's uncle, Kevin, believes the commonalities are too plentiful to rule out the same culprit being responsible, and detectives have been convinced the same is true for years. But Kathryn's mother believes it is just a coincidence. Michael Kreider, a Beaver County detective assigned to the case, said officers suspected Sarah's now-deceased alcoholic father, Jack Boehm Jr., who was convicted of abusing a 12-year-old relative of Sarah's. People also noted Jack's odd behavior after his daughter went missing. Police were so convinced Sarah's father had something to do with her disappearance and death that they excavated his basement and brought over dogs to search his property. Sarah's father pleaded guilty in October 2000 to charges of indecent assault and corrupting the morals of a minor concerning Sarah's cousin's assault. But he said he was in a concert in West Virginia on the day Sarah was taken. It also appears his polygraph was inconclusive. Sarah's uncle Kevin asked his brother, Sarah's father, if he had anything to admit in his final moments, insinuating he was giving his brother the space to admit to the death of his own daughter. But Jack Boehm admitted no fault, even knowing his life's end was near, and wanted to find out what happened just as much as everyone else did. Kevin said he had no reason not to believe his now late brother. There does lie the distinct possibility that Sarah was also a victim of her father and couldn't bear the abuse any longer, compelling her to leave her family behind and start anew. Maybe she wasn't fibbing about the abuse she was facing at the hands of an older man. Maybe she was too ashamed to say aloud what the real issue was and hoped on some level that her father would come forward and confess. But if her father did have anything to do with the murder of his own daughter, it would certainly be difficult to discover, compounded by his death. Police have been interested in a man who Sarah alleged to have attempted to abduct her after church one day. She was so upset about the incident that she made an official police report about the traumatic experience. He also does sound like a viable suspect for the murder and her abduction. Detective Kreider said they have unearthed new leads from people who have relationships between the spot in which Sarah Boehm was living and where hers and Kathryn Menendez's bodies were found. In November 2015, law enforcement re-examined the physical evidence they collected in Sarah's case, as well as the area where they found her body, but nothing aided in putting a killer behind bars. Police have followed leads, interviewed suspects, and still to this day, voraciously work to close the two cases. Officers have been pleading with the public for years for anyone with even the smallest amount of information about Kathryn's or Sarah's murder to come forward. A thwarting component of this case, like so many other cold cases like I mentioned earlier, is someone out there usually knows something. As of November 2021, the police did have a person of interest ready to polygraph. But still, no suspect has been officially named or charged with the crimes of either of the slain young girls. Though frustrated, the FBI agent in charge, Robert Jones, said that they adamantly work every day to try and give the community and remaining family members closure in this case. Anyone with information on either of the girls' murders can anonymously call the FBI at 412-432-4000 or the Beaver County District Attorney's Office at 724-773-8550. No tip is too small, no information is useless, and the poor girls who were robbed of so many pinnacle moments in their lives, like prom, marriage, love, college, children, or graduation, deserve justice and remembrance.